Every negotiation you walk away from has already decided in advance how much money you will make or lose this year. Not the market, not the economy, not luck. The negotiation. And here is what almost nobody tells African entrepreneurs about negotiation. Most of us are taught somewhere along the way that we only have two options when we sit across from someone we need something from. We can be aggressive, push hard, demand the best terms, treat the other side as an opponent to defeat, or we can be accommodating, accept whatever is offered, avoid conflict, preserve the relationship at the cost of our own position. Both of these approaches are wrong, and both of them are quietly draining wealth out of African businesses every single day. The aggressive negotiator wins the deal and loses the relationship. They get better terms once, and then the supplier finds a reason to stop prioritizing them. The client finds a reason to take their business elsewhere. The landlord finds a reason not to renew the lease. The accommodating negotiator keeps the relationship and loses the deal. They preserve the friendliness, the smiles, the warmth, while quietly accepting terms that cost them thousands of dollars over the life of that relationship. Dollar by dollar, deal by deal. Year after year, Dangote built relationships with governments, international banks, and global corporations across 4 decades of negotiation. Those relationships are still standing today, and the terms he secured through those relationships built one of the largest industrial empires in history. He did this without being purely aggressive, and he did this without being purely accommodating. He used a third approach, one that almost nobody teaches clearly, and one that I am going to break down for you completely in this video. Why most negotiation advice fails Africans specifically. Before I give you the framework, I need to address something specific to doing business on this continent. Most negotiation content available online comes from Western business culture, direct, transactional, often built around the assumption that the negotiation is a single, isolated event between two parties who may never deal with each other again. That assumption does not hold in most African business contexts. In Lagos, in Accra, in Nairobi, in Kampala, business is relational. The supplier you negotiate with today, you will likely negotiate with again next month, next year, for the next decade. The client you push too hard today may be the same person whose cousin owns the company you need a contract with in 3 years. Reputation travels faster and matters more in interconnected business communities than in the anonymous, transactional markets that most negotiation books were written for. This means that any negotiation strategy imported wholesale from Western business culture, the ESIP kind that treats every negotiation as a one-time transaction to be won at all costs, will systematically damage your long-term position in African markets, even when it produces short-term wins. Dangote understood this distinction before he had his first factory. His negotiation philosophy was built specifically for an environment where the same suppliers, the same government officials, the same banking relationships, and the same business partners would be relevant to his success for decades, not days. That is the foundation everything else in this video is built on. The framework, value-based negotiation. Here is the third approach, the one that built Dangote's empire without burning the relationships required to sustain it. It is called value-based negotiation, and it operates on a single principle. That changes everything about how you walk into any deal. The goal of a negotiation is not to win. The goal is to discover and create value that did not exist before the conversation started, and then to divide that value in a way both sides feel was fair. This sounds abstract. Let me make it completely concrete. When you negotiate purely on price, I want to pay less. You want to charge more? There is only one variable on the table, and every dollar one side gains is $1. The other side loses. This is called a zero-sum negotiation. It produces winners and losers, and the losing side remembers exactly how they lost and adjusts their behavior in every future interaction accordingly. When you negotiate on value, exploring what each side actually needs, not just what they are asking for, you often discover that there are multiple variables that matter differently to each side. And when there are multiple variables, there is room to create outcomes where both Sides get more of what they actually care about, without either side simply losing. Let me give you a concrete example from a typical African business context. A supplier offers you goods at a price you consider too high. A purely price-based negotiation involves you pushing for a lower number and the supplier resisting, with one side eventually conceding more than the other. Value-based negotiation starts with a different question entirely. What does this supplier actually need beyond this specific price? Perhaps they need predictable, recurring orders rather than one-off purchases, because that allows them to plan their production and reduce their own costs. Perhaps they need faster payment, because their own cash flow is constrained. Perhaps they need a long-term commitment that allows them to justify offering you better terms than they could offer a one-time buyer. If you discover that this supplier values payment speed more than the absolute price, you might offer immediate payment in exchange for a meaningfully lower price than they would offer someone paying in 60 days. You have not simply pushed them down on price through pressure. You have identified something they value, traded it for something you value, and created an outcome that genuinely serves both parties better than the original positions on the table. This is what Dangote did at industrial scale throughout his career, and it is exactly as available to you in your smallest daily transactions as it was to him in multi-billion-dollar deals. The 5-step process. Let me break this down into a specific, repeatable process you can apply in your very next negotiation. Step 1. Separate positions from interests. A position is what someone says they want. An interest is why they want it. When a supplier says, "I need this price," that is their position. The interest behind it might be protecting their margin, matching what their other clients pay, covering a specific cost increase they have experienced, or simply testing whether you will push back at all. When a client says, "I need a lower price," their position is clear. But their underlying interest might be staying within a fixed budget set by someone above them, comparing your offer against a specific competitor, or genuinely not understanding the value of what you are providing. The mistake most entrepreneurs make is negotiating against the position, arguing about the number itself, without ever discovering the interest behind it. Once you understand the actual interest, you can often find solutions that satisfy it without simply conceding on price. Ask directly, "Help me understand what's driving this number for you." Most people, when asked genuinely and respectfully, will tell you exactly what is behind their position. This single question will reveal more useful information than an hour of back and forth haggling over numbers. Step 2. Know your walkaway point before you sit down. This is the step that prevents emotional decisions in the moment of negotiation. Before any negotiation begins, determine precisely the point beyond which you will walk away. Not an approximate feeling. A specific number, a specific term, a specific condition. Dangote's negotiating teams never enter a major deal without absolute clarity on this point, because the moment you are uncertain about your own walkaway position, the other side can sense that uncertainty, and uncertainty as the single biggest weakness in any negotiation. People who are unclear about their own limits make concessions they later regret, simply because they did not have a clear line to hold. For your next negotiation, write down, before you have the conversation, the exact terms below which you will not proceed. This single piece of preparation will change how confidently you negotiate, because confidence in a negotiation comes from clarity, not aggression. Step 3. Make the first offer when you have information. Let them anchor when you don't. There is a well-documented effect in negotiation psychology called anchoring. The first number mentioned in a negotiation has a disproportionate influence on where the final agreement lands, even when both parties know the first number was just an opening position. This means that when you have good information about market rates, fair pricing or reasonable terms, make the first offer, set the anchor in your favor, and let the negotiation move from your starting point rather than theirs. When you do not have good information, when you are entering an unfamiliar market, dealing with an unfamiliar product, or negotiating in a context where you genuinely do not know what fair terms look like, let the other side make the first offer. This protects you from anchoring yourself at an unfavorable position out of ignorance, and it gives you information about their expectations that you can use in your response. Dangote's teams research extensively before any major negotiation, specifically so they can confidently make the first offer and set favorable anchors. Preparation is not a courtesy in negotiation. It is the entire foundation of negotiating power. Step 4. Trade concessions, never give them away. This is perhaps the single most important behavioral shift in this entire framework. Every time you make a concession in a negotiation, agreeing to a lower price, a faster timeline, better terms for the other side, that concession should be explicitly traded for something else, never given freely. If a client asks for a lower price, the response is not simply, "Okay, I can do that." The response is, "I can consider that if we extend the contract length," or "I can do that if payment happens up front instead of on delivery," or "I can do that if the order volume increases." This single habit accomplishes two things simultaneously. First, it ensures you are never simply losing value without gaining something in return. Second, and this matters enormously in relationship-based business cultures, it signals to the other side that you value what you offer, which paradoxically makes them respect the relationship more, not less. People who give concessions freely are training the other side to expect more free concessions in every future interaction. People who trade concessions are training the other side to understand that working with them requires a fair exchange, which is precisely the foundation of a sustainable, long-term business relationship. Step 5. Close with the relationship explicitly in mind. The final step is the one most negotiation training completely ignores, and it is the one most critical to doing business successfully across African markets specifically. Before any negotiation ends, explicitly address the long-term relationship, separate from the specific deal terms just agreed upon. This can be as simple as a direct statement. "I want this to be the first of many deals between us, and I want both of us to feel this was fair." This single sentence does something powerful, damn it. Signals that you view this interaction as the beginning of a relationship, not an isolated transaction to be won and forgotten. Dangote's longest-standing business relationships with specific banks, specific government bodies, specific international partners were built through decades of negotiations where both sides consistently felt the outcomes were fair, even when individual deals favored one side slightly more than the other in any given instance. The consistency of fairness over time, communicated explicitly at the close of each negotiation, built the trust that allowed those relationships to scale to enormous size. If you're still watching, and subscribe right now, because what comes next addresses the specific situations that make negotiation feel impossible when you have no leverage, when the other side has all the power, and when you genuinely cannot afford to walk away. Negotiating when you have no leverage. This is the situation most African entrepreneurs actually face most of the time. You need this supplier more than they need you. You need this client more than they need you. You cannot simply walk away because the alternative is worse than accepting unfavorable terms. Here is what Dangote's approach teaches us about exactly this situation. When you have no leverage in the deal itself, you create leverage outside the deal. This means building alternatives before you need them, not during the negotiation when you are desperate. If you only have one supplier for a critical input, you have given that supplier complete control over your business without realizing it. The work of negotiation in this situation happens months before the actual conversation by deliberately developing relationships with 2 or 3 alternative suppliers, even if you never use them, simply so that your current supplier knows alternatives exist. This means making yourself more valuable to the other side, even when you cannot change the immediate terms. If you cannot negotiate a better price with a major client because you desperately need their business, you can negotiate to become more deeply embedded in their operations, taking on additional related work, becoming the trusted default option for adjacent needs, which increases your value to them over time, creating leverage for future negotiations even when the current one is constrained. This means using time itself as leverage. Many negotiations that feel impossible in the moment become possible when extended over a longer time frame. If a landlord will not reduce your rent today, a conversation about a longer lease term in exchange for a rate that does not increase for 3 years often succeeds, where a simple request for a discount fails because you have introduced a new variable that benefits the other side enough to justify the concession you need. Dangote built his entire empire while frequently having less leverage than the international banks, foreign suppliers, and established competitors he negotiated against in the early decades of his career. The lesson from that period is not that leverage does not matter. It is that leverage can be built deliberately, over time through preparation and patience, even when it does not exist in the moment you need it most. What you do in your very next negotiation. I want to leave you with something specific and immediately usable. Before your next negotiation, whether it is with a supplier this week, a client next month, or a landlord at your next lease renewal, do 3 things. Identify the actual interest behind the other side's stated position by asking them directly what is driving their number. Write down your specific walkaway point before the conversation begins, so you negotiate from clarity rather than emotion in the moment. Prepare at least one concession you are willing to trade, and decide explicitly what you will ask for in return before you offer it. These 3 actions, applied consistently across every negotiation you have from this point forward, will compound over years into a measurably different financial position than the one you would reach by accepting whatever terms are offered or by aggressively pushing without strategy. Dangote did not become Africa's most successful negotiator through aggression or through accommodation. He became successful through clarity, preparation, and a genuine understanding that the relationships built through fair, value-based negotiation were themselves one of the most valuable assets his empire would ever possess. Negotiate the same way, not to win every single deal, to build relationships strong enough and terms fair enough that the same people want to keep doing business with you for decades. If this video gave you something you can use in your very next negotiation, subscribe, because next week we go deeper into the verification system Dangote uses before trusting any new business partner with his capital. See you there.